There's a quiet revolution that begins in your life when you stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to be yourself. It doesn't come with a loud declaration or an abrupt change. It starts slowly in moments so small they almost go unnoticed. In the way you pause before saying yes, in the breath you take before reacting, in the decision to walk away instead of argue. It begins when you realize that the version of yourself you've been performing, the one that pleases, performs, survives, is not the only way to exist. It's in that subtle awakening where everything begins to shift. The mask you've worn for so long doesn't fit anymore. It slips slightly, and in that moment, you see yourself. Not the edited version, not the one that's been constantly adapting, but the one underneath, the real you. And you wonder how long she's been waiting for you to notice her. You don't rip the mask off all at once. You don't run into the world shouting, "Here I am." You tiptoe at first. You test the waters. You say something honest in a conversation, and even though your heart races afterward, nothing bad happens. You survive. You speak your truth in a room that once scared you into silence, and you feel the ground beneath you hold steady. You begin to trust that maybe you don't have to perform to be safe. Maybe you don't have to agree to be accepted. Maybe you don't have to disappear to be loved. The more you try, the more you realize. It was never you that was the problem. It was the spaces that never made room for your truth. And now you're no longer willing to shrink for someone else's comfort. You begin to reclaim parts of yourself you forgot. The version of you that loved to sit in silence and watch clouds move. The version of you that cried easily at movies, songs, or memories. The part that didn't need everything to make sense before taking the next step. You stop judging those parts as childish or weak. You realize now they weren't broken. They were buried, hidden away under layers of responsibility, expectation, and fear. And now gently you start unearthing them. Not all at once, but like a careful gardener tending to something fragile. You give yourself time. You let those pieces rise at their own pace. And as they return, so do you. You notice how different life feels when you're no longer trying to outrun yourself. You slow down. Not because you've given up, but because you've finally stopped running from the parts of you that needed rest. You don't fill every moment with productivity. You leave room now for breath, for reflection, for nothing. You sit in your room with no distractions and feel the rhythm of your own existence. You begin to feel your body as a home, not a battlefield. You place your hand on your chest and whisper, "I'm here." And for the first time in a long time, you believe yourself. Your definition of strength begins to change. You used to think it meant being unshakable, that to be strong was to never cry, never doubt, never need. But that kind of strength left you brittle. It left you lonely. Now you understand that strength is softness that doesn't collapse. It's vulnerability without apology. It's being able to say, "I don't know," and still be grounded. It's having the courage to ask for help, to fall apart in front of someone and trust that you're still lovable in the mess. You realize that real strength is not in what you can carry alone. It's in knowing you don't have to. You begin to notice how much of your energy was spent trying to control things. Every outcome, every reaction, every perception. You tried so hard to manage everything, thinking that if you could just get it right, then finally you'd feel peace. But all that control came with a cost. It cost you your joy. It cost you your spontaneity. It made your world small. And now you begin to loosen your grip. You start letting life happen without rushing to fix it. You say, "I trust," even when you don't have all the answers. You let people think what they want. You let situations unfold without manipulation. And you learn something revolutionary, that life doesn't fall apart when you stop controlling it. It breathes, it expands, it softens, and so do you. You don't need as much anymore. Not because you've settled, but because you've simplified. You don't crave the same validation, the same attention, the same approval. You no longer perform in hopes of being chosen. You've chosen yourself. You've decided to make your life a place you want to live in, not a stage for someone else's applause. You find joy in the ordinary, a cup of tea, a slow walk, a deep breath. You stop chasing highs and start cultivating steadiness. You don't need the noise. You don't need the chaos. You just need truth, presence, peace, and you're learning how to give it to yourself. Your relationship with your past changes too. You don't look at it with the same sharpness, the same regret. You stop seeing it as something to escape and start seeing it as something that shaped you. You acknowledge the pain without letting it define you. You hold your younger self with compassion. You stop criticizing the choices you made when you didn't know better. You say to that old version of you, you did what you could. Thank you. And that gratitude softens something inside you. It allows you to move forward, not in denial, but in dignity. You no longer drag your past like a burden. You carry it like a teacher. You start to trust your timing. You stop panicking when things don't happen according to your plan. You understand now that delay is not denial, that waiting is not punishment. You know that what's real for you will never require force. You stop begging the universe for shortcuts. You let things ripen. You let yourself ripen. You plant seeds without demanding immediate bloom. You understand the value of becoming, the sacredness of process. You say, when it's time, and then you keep living. Not in limbo, but in love, with what is, with what was, with what could be. And somewhere in the middle of all this quiet shifting, you begin to feel a steadiness, a presence, a you that isn't based on performance or perfection or productivity, a you that simply is. And that self, she doesn't need to be earned. She doesn't need to be improved. She just needs to be remembered, to be trusted, to be loved. You begin that love story, one breath at a time. You start to notice the patterns, not as problems, but as pathways, repetitions that aren't here to punish you, but to awaken you. The way you keep attracting the same kind of person, the same kind of silence, the same kind of ending. You stop asking, why does this keep happening to me? And start asking, what am I being shown? And that question, it softens everything. It turns blame into awareness. It turns frustration into insight. You don't judge yourself for the loops anymore. You don't shame yourself for the stumbles. You get curious. You lean in. You follow the thread all the way to its root. And when you arrive there, in the quiet ache beneath the noise, you realize that what you've been calling broken was just a wound waiting to be witnessed. You begin to see that healing doesn't mean you never hurt again. It doesn't mean that triggers disappear or that pain forgets your name. Healing means you relate to the pain differently. You no longer panic in its presence. You recognize it. You say, I know you. I've sat with you before. And in that familiarity, something shifts. The pain doesn't swallow you like it used to. It doesn't control you. You still feel it, but you know now how to hold yourself through it. You know how to breathe, how to ground, how to stay. And that staying, that's what changes everything. That's the strength you use to think lived in, pushing through. But now you understand, real strength is staying with yourself when it's hard. Now you start creating space, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically. You stop filling every corner of your life with noise. You begin to make room for stillness, for reflection, for joy. You let go of the things that once felt necessary, but now feel heavy. The relationships that leave you empty, the obligations that steal your light. You clean out your home and notice how it mirrors your inner world. Fewer things, more peace. Less clutter, more clarity. You begin to understand that space isn't absence, it's invitation. And when you create space, something beautiful happens. Life begins to meet you there. Peace enters, inspiration flows. Love finds room to grow. You let go of urgency. You used to rush everything. Your healing, your growth, your success. You believed you were always behind, always running out of time. But now you pause, you ask, where is this urgency coming from? And often the answer is fear. Fear of missing out, fear of not being good enough, fear of being forgotten. But you're tired of being afraid, you're tired of living in that tight space. So you choose trust, you choose presence. You say, I am right where I need to be. You slow your steps, you breathe between decisions, and life becomes less of a race and more of a rhythm. A melody you no longer rush through, a song you let yourself feel. You begin to stop proving yourself. There was a time when everything you did had an undercurrent of performance. Trying to be worthy, trying to be seen, trying to be chosen. You wore productivity like a badge, burned yourself out just to feel like you mattered. But now you ask, what if I matter simply because I exist? And when you sit with that question, something in you exhales. You feel the weight lift, the weight of proving, of earning, of pleasing. You realize that your worth isn't something you reach for. It's something you remember. You are enough not because of what you do, but because of who you are when you stop doing. You revisit your inner child, not just as a concept, but as a living, breathing presence inside you. You see her in the way you flinch when you feel rejected, in the way you brace for abandonment, in the way you hesitate to speak your needs. You stop resenting her for the fears. You stop judging her for the survival patterns. You take her hand. You say, I see you. I'm here now. You don't have to do this alone anymore. And slowly, she begins to trust you. She begins to believe that she doesn't have to protect you in all the old ways, that she can rest, that you've got this. And that shift ripples through your entire being. It roots you. It heals you. You start loving yourself not as an act of defiance, but as a natural return to truth. It's no longer a protest. It's not a performance. It's not something you do to prove that you've healed. It's something you do because you finally understand what love is meant to feel like. It's gentle, it's consistent, it's not earned, it's given. You stop looking for mirrors in others. You stop holding your breath, waiting for someone to reflect back to you what you can now give yourself. Love that isn't dependent on performance. Love that doesn't disappear when you make a mistake. Love that stays. And every time you choose yourself, in the way you speak, in the way you rest, in the way you say no, you reaffirm that love, quietly, boldly, daily. You begin to walk differently in the world, not because the world has changed, but because you have. You used to move carefully, always assessing, always anticipating reactions. You moved as if every step might offend, as if your existence needed to be softened to avoid disruption. But now you take up space, not aggressively, not to dominate, but because you finally understood that your presence is not a burden. It's a gift. You walk with your head a little higher, your eyes softer, your spine more aligned. You're not performing, you're just being. And somehow that being is more powerful than any performance ever was. You begin to notice your triggers as teachers, not enemies. That quick rush of heat in your chest, that sharp tug in your gut, those used to make you ashamed. You judge yourself for reacting, but now you pause. You listen. You trace the reaction back, like following a river to its source. And often you find something tender there, an old story, a wound that hasn't quite closed. And instead of forcing it to disappear, you tend to it. You breathe with it. You ask, what do you need from me? And the more you do that, the more those triggers lose their grip. Not because they're gone, but because they're held. You learn how to stay in the discomfort, stay in the present, stay in your body. You used to escape at the first sign of pain, into thoughts, into busyness, into caretaking. But now you stay, even when it's uncomfortable, even when everything in you wants to run. You stay because you've realized that running doesn't make the feeling go away. It just delays it. And staying allows the feeling to move, to pass, to soften. You no longer fear your feelings. You welcome them like visitors. Some bring gifts, others bring grief. But all of them come with something to teach you. And you are learning. You begin to reclaim your joy, not the performative kind, not the joy that depends on someone else's permission, but the raw, untamed joy that lives in your bones. You find it in small things, the way sunlight warms your face, the way a song makes you move without thinking, the way your laughter surprises even you. You stop waiting for life to be perfect to feel joy. You let it in now, in the middle of the mess. You don't push it away because you're still healing. You know now that joy and healing are not separate. They are companions. You let them dance together inside you. You start to feel safe in your own presence. You used to fear your own mind. You used to stay busy just to avoid hearing your own thoughts. But now solitude feels sacred. You sit with yourself and it doesn't feel lonely. It feels like home. You stop filling every silence with noise. You stop running from yourself, and in that stillness, you hear things you missed for years. You hear your own wisdom, your own clarity, your own voice rising softly saying, "I've been here all along." And that voice, it becomes your guide, your compass, your constant. You stop chasing closure from others. You realize that closure was never theirs to give. It lives in your body, in your breath, in the moment you stop waiting for them to fix what they broke. You write your own endings. You grieve. You release, you forgive, not to erase the past, but to free your future. You no longer need their apology to move forward. You don't carry the bitterness anymore. You carry the lesson. You carry your own peace. You say goodbye not with resentment, but with reverence. Because even the pain taught you something. Even the hurt led you home. You begin to notice how alive you feel when you're aligned. When your words match your truth. When your choices reflect your values. When your life doesn't require constant recovery. You stop tolerating what depletes you. You stop settling for almost right. You want real now, deep now, honest now. You don't need perfection. You need presence. You don't need everything to look good. You need it to feel true. And that shift in values, it changes everything. It changes how you work, how you love, how you show up for yourself and others. You learn how to be soft without losing your strength. You used to believe you had to choose, be kind or be powerful. But now you see that the most powerful people are the ones who can still be kind, the ones who can be vulnerable without collapsing, the ones who can hold boundaries without cruelty. You are learning that your softness is not your weakness. It's your superpower. It's the part of you that still believes in beauty, in compassion, in connection. You don't shut it down anymore. You let it shine. And the world, harsh as it may be, becomes a little softer because of you. And somewhere in all of this, you begin to trust life again, not blindly, not naively, but with a heart that has seen what it means to break and still chose to open. You no longer need guarantees. You no longer need everything to be mapped out. You trust the process, the unfolding, the seasons. You trust yourself to survive what comes, to thrive in what remains. And that trust, that quiet, rooted trust, that's what keeps you steady now. That's what keeps you soft. That's what keeps you whole. There's a tenderness that rises in you when you finally stop treating your emotions as problems to fix and start seeing them as parts of you that are simply trying to speak. For years, you were taught to control your feelings, to suppress them, to smile through pain, to hold it together when you were quietly falling apart. You told yourself you were strong because you didn't cry, because you didn't complain, because you didn't let it show. But all that strength came at a cost. You buried parts of your heart that only ever needed to be heard. And now, when those emotions come knocking, softly or all at once, you no longer slam the door shut. You open it. You sit with them. You ask them what they need. And you learn that every feeling you've ever avoided was simply asking for your presence. You begin to understand that your healing doesn't need to look graceful. Some days it's messy. Some days it's quiet. Some days it's a storm. And others, a whisper. There are days you feel whole, grounded, open, and days you feel heavy, fragile, raw. But you stop grading yourself on your emotional performance. You stop assigning worth to how well you manage the pain. You let yourself be human, complex, evolving. You don't ask your healing to be convenient anymore. You let it take up space, and you begin to trust that every emotion, even the uncomfortable ones, is a doorway, not a dead end. You notice how much of your past was about survival, about navigating rooms that didn't see you, adapting to people who didn't know how to hold you, pretending you were okay just to keep things peaceful. You stop blaming yourself for the ways you coped. You stop shaming yourself for the armor you had to wear. You realize that your survival strategies were love stories too. They were your body saying, "Let me keep you safe." And now you thank them. You say, "You got me here. I'm ready for something softer now." And as the armor falls away, you don't feel exposed. You feel real. You feel alive. You stop mistaking burnout for progress. You used to believe that if you weren't exhausted, you weren't doing enough. That rest was laziness. That stillness was weakness. You ran yourself into the ground trying to prove your worth. But now you see things differently. You see that your body is not a machine, that your energy is sacred, that pushing through everything isn't sustainable, and more than that, it's unkind. You begin to move slower, with intention, with rhythm. You give yourself permission to rest before you crash. You schedule joy, not just tasks. You let yourself play, nap, breathe, wander. You redefine what it means to be productive. Now it means anything that nourishes your soul. You stop carrying what was never yours to hold. The guilt, the expectations, the pain that others projected onto you. You used to internalize so much thinking it was your job to fix, to explain, to absorb. But now you've drawn a line. You know what belongs to you and what doesn't. You stop carrying blame for people who refuse to look at their own wounds. You stop taking responsibility for the stories others created about you. You know who you are. You know your heart. And you stop offering it to people who only see it through the lens of their own limitations. You begin to show up differently in relationships. You don't seek validation in empty conversations. You don't chase people who leave you guessing. You don't romanticize inconsistency. You want depth now, reciprocity, presence. You want relationships that feel like exhale, where you don't have to beg to be understood, where your silence is honored, not questioned, where your truth is welcomed, not debated. You become more discerning, not because you've closed your heart, but because you finally realize that not everyone is meant to hold it. You value connection over convenience, intimacy over attention, realness over rhythm. You no longer let fear lead. You see fear for what it is, a protector, not a prophet. It's the voice that kept you safe when you didn't know how to trust. But now you speak back. You say, "Thank you, but I'm not letting you steer anymore." You move forward anyway, even when your hands shake, even when doubt follows every step. You don't wait for the fear to leave. You take it with you, gently. And that courage, not the absence of fear, but the presence of truth despite it, that's what begins to shape your life. You begin to celebrate your small wins, not just the milestones, but the moments. The breath you took instead of breaking down, the conversation you didn't avoid, the morning you got out of bed when it felt impossible. You used to skip over these, dismiss them, thinking they didn't count. But now you see that they were always everything. That healing isn't made in grand gestures. It's in these tiny shifts, these brave, quiet moments where you chose yourself over and over when no one was watching. You learn to trust the seasons of your life, the blooming and the burning, the silence and the storm. You stop trying to force spring in the middle of your winter. You stop shaming yourself for needing time, for needing rest, for needing space to fall apart before you build again. You honor the rhythm of your soul, not the calendar of the world. You understand that your pace is not only valid, it's divine. You stop asking, "Why am I not there yet?" and start asking, "What is this season here to teach me?" And in that question, you find peace. You begin to realize that self-love is not a destination. It's a daily decision, a practice, a vow. It's not found in perfect affirmations or spa days or curated routines. It's found in the way you speak to yourself when no one else is around, in the way you sit with your sadness without rushing to fix it, in the way you laugh at your own jokes, cry in your car, rest when your body says rest. Self-love isn't something you earn by becoming a better version of yourself. It's something you return to when you remember that you've always been worthy of it. And maybe, just maybe, one evening when the sun sets a little softer and the world quiets just enough, you'll look at yourself, not in the mirror, but inward, and say, "I'm proud of you." Not because you've done everything right, not because you're finished growing, but because you've kept showing up, kept loving, kept learning. And that in itself is enough. That is the miracle. You, here, still becoming. There is something sacred that begins to bloom in your life the moment you realize you no longer need to apologize for being who you are. Not the curated version of you, not the one smoothed out and softened to be more digestible for the comfort of others, but the real, raw, deeply human you. The one who speaks too passionately sometimes, the one who cries when overwhelmed, the one who needs space but also craves connection, The one who has changed not to be loved, but because she has loved and lost and learned through every twist and ache. You realize now that you are not here to be everyone's favorite flavor. You are here to be yourself. And that self is layered, flawed, wild, tender, and beautifully whole, even in her brokenness. You begin to understand that not everyone is meant to stay. You stop gripping so tightly to people who are only meant to pass through your life, like a wind that stirs the dust. You no longer chase the ones who leave without looking back. You don't beg for love where it's withheld, and you don't try to convince anyone to see you clearly. You've done that dance before, and all it ever left you with was the echo of your own voice in rooms that were never built to hold you. Now you release with grace. You say goodbye with open hands, and you thank the endings for the space they leave behind. Space that is now yours to fill with light, with truth, with the kind of love that doesn't make you question your worth. You become less concerned with how things look and more focused on how they feel. You used to dress your pain in productivity, wear a smile like armor, and hide your fear behind a polished exterior. You lived in a world that praised appearances and ignored the quiet ache of authenticity. But now you ask yourself questions that cut deeper. Does this nourish me? Does this align with who I am becoming? Do I feel seen here, or am I shrinking again? You stop performing happiness and start cultivating it. You stop posting highlights to feel valid and start honoring your whole story, even the chapters that aren't camera ready. You realize that a life lived from truth will never be as shiny as the ones edited for approval, but it will be real. And that reality, even when messy, is where your soul begins to bloom. You stop asking for directions from people who've never been to where you're going. You no longer hand over your compass to those who don't understand your landscape. You realize that no one else can define your journey, not your family, not your friends, not society. Only you can. You don't need every step mapped out. You just need to trust the one in front of you. You begin listening to your own inner knowing, not the loud, anxious voice of fear, but the deeper, quieter one that lives beneath the noise. The one that says, "This is the way." And even when that way feels unfamiliar, you follow it. Because you've tried following everyone else, and it only led you further from yourself. You no longer romanticize struggle. You stop believing that worth is found in how much pain you can endure. You've carried enough. You've survived enough. You begin to crave softness, not as weakness, but as a new kind of strength. You want love that doesn't require war. You want healing that doesn't hurt just to be valid. You want work that allows for joy, friendships that nourish, and days that don't leave you hollow. You stop glorifying the grind. You stop sacrificing your well-being on the altar of ambition. You let yourself enjoy ease. You let yourself receive support. You let yourself feel safe, even when the world tells you that struggle is the only path to success. You're rewriting that story now. You're choosing peace. You start to forgive yourself in deeper ways. Not just for the mistakes you made when you didn't know better, but for the times you knew and still fell anyway. You forgive yourself for staying too long, for not speaking up, for abandoning your own intuition. You forgive yourself for the patterns that held you hostage, for the wounds that shaped your choices. You don't excuse the harm, but you do release the shame. You stop identifying with the pain and start identifying with the person who lived through it, who rose from it, who continues to rise every single day. You speak to yourself with tenderness now, with compassion, with the kind of love you once begged others to give you, because now you see you are worthy of that love, from yourself first. You redefine beauty. You stop chasing the version of yourself that only exists in filtered photos and impossible standards. You begin to love the skin that holds your stories, the eyes that have witnessed your becoming, the hands that have created and comforted and carried so much. You stop punishing your body for not looking like someone else's. You feed it with intention. You rest it with kindness. You listen to what it needs. You celebrate what it gives you. You stand in front of the mirror and say, "I see you. I thank you." And even if you don't believe it every time, you keep saying it, until one day you do. You become less interested in being impressive and more interested in being impactful. You don't need to be the loudest voice in the room. You don't need a million followers to feel valid. You care more about depth than display, about authenticity over applause. You write because you have something to say, not because you want to be liked. You speak because your truth matters, not because you need validation. You know now that real impact doesn't always come with recognition. Sometimes it's in the way you make someone feel seen. Sometimes it's in the energy you leave behind, and you're okay with that, because you're not here to be famous. You're here to be free. You begin to fall in love with the parts of your life that once felt insignificant. The sound of rain, the smell of bread in the oven, the way sunlight dances on your wall. You stop rushing through your days just to get to the next big thing. You start slowing down, paying attention, being where your feet are. You savor the ordinary. You take joy in the mundane. You begin to see that this moment, this breath, this simple peace is the magic you've been looking for. It was never in the finish line. It was always here in the middle of it all, in the now. And maybe that's the most profound shift of all. You stop striving to become someone else and start remembering who you've always been. Before the noise, before the conditioning, before the world told you who to be, you peel back the layers, you shed the roles, you take off the mask, and beneath it all, you find her, the girl who believed, who felt deeply, who dreamed wildly. You look at her and say, "I'm sorry I left. I'm back now." And she smiles, not because everything is perfect, but because she knows you finally came home. There is a quiet rebellion in choosing joy in a world that thrives on fear. You begin to see how often you've been taught to anticipate loss, to brace for heartbreak, to never get too comfortable in anything that feels good. You've been conditioned to expect the worst just so you're not surprised by it. But that kind of living doesn't protect you. It suffocates you. So now you begin to unlearn it. You start letting yourself feel joy without waiting for the other shoe to drop. You smile fully. You laugh without restraint. You savor the good things as they come, not because they'll last forever, but because they are here now. You understand that joy doesn't have to be permanent to be real. It doesn't have to be perfect to be worth feeling. And when you finally give yourself permission to live in the light, even briefly, you start to remember what freedom really feels like. You learn that boundaries are a love language, not just for others, but for yourself. You stop setting them with resentment and start setting them with reverence. You don't need to yell to be clear. You don't need to prove your worthiness to say no. You say it gently but firmly, not to punish, but to protect. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided what they want to hear. You stop shrinking so others can expand. You take up space. You draw the lines. And if someone cannot honor the shape of your peace, you walk away. Not out of anger, but out of self-respect. Because now you know, every time you choose your peace over pleasing, your spirit grows stronger. You begin to make peace with being misunderstood. You no longer chase explanations like lifelines. You don't exhaust yourself trying to get people to see you clearly. You stop clarifying your intentions for those committed to misunderstanding you. You realize that some people will only meet you at the depth of their own wounds, not the depth of your truth. And that's okay. You don't need to force alignment where there is resistance. You stop proving, you start protecting. You say, "I know who I am," and let that be enough. Because now you understand. Being misunderstood by others is far less painful than abandoning yourself for their approval. You start loving the version of yourself you once tried so hard to escape. The one who was anxious, messy, tender, afraid. You stop seeing her as weak. You see her as a fighter, a survivor, a sacred part of your story. You realize that she didn't ruin your life. She saved it. She kept showing up even when she didn't feel like she belonged. She kept going, even when all she wanted was rest. You stop rejecting her. You embrace her. You say, "Thank you for carrying me." And that forgiveness of yourself for yourself is one of the greatest healings you will ever know. You begin to understand that some of the most important transformations happen in solitude. Not in the presence of others, not in applause or external validation, but in the quiet, sacred spaces where no one is watching. In the early mornings when you choose peace over panic, in the long nights where you sit with your pain instead of distracting yourself, In the small, consistent decisions to stay soft, stay grounded, stay true. That's where the real work happens. That's where you bloom. Not all at once, but moment by moment, in silence, in stillness, in becoming. You stop waiting for your life to start. You used to think you needed something, someone, somewhere, someday to give you permission to live fully. But now you know better. You know that this is it. This breath, this step, this chapter. You stop postponing joy until the healing is complete. You stop delaying your dreams until you feel completely ready. You start now, as you are, even if it's messy, even if you're scared, even if you don't know how it ends, because you're no longer living for a finish line. You're living for the experience, for the growth, for the love you offer yourself in every imperfect, beautiful step. You begin honoring your pace. You stop comparing your progress to the highlight reels of others. You no longer feel behind just because your timeline doesn't match theirs. You understand that healing, growth, success, love, they all come in seasons. And your season may look different. It may be quieter, it may be slower, but it is still valid, it is still holy. You stop forcing yourself to bloom on someone else's schedule. You tend to your own soil, you give yourself sunlight and time, and you trust that when it's your moment to rise, you will. Fully, naturally, unapologetically. You stop fearing your needs. You used to believe that needing was weakness, that to be loved, you had to be self-sufficient, unbothered, low maintenance. But now you understand that your needs are not burdens, they are bridges, they are invitations to intimacy. You allow yourself to be held, to be comforted, to be seen. You don't apologize for asking for clarity, for reassurance, for consistency. You stop pretending to be okay when you're not. You speak, you express, you allow yourself to be human. And in doing so, you attract people who love you in your fullness, not just when you're strong, but especially when you're soft. You start to look at your pain differently, not as something that defines you, but as something that has refined you. You see it now, not as a punishment, but as a portal, a teacher, a messenger. You no longer run from it, you learn from it. You sit with it. You ask, what are you here to show me? And the answers come, not always quickly, not always clearly, but they come. And you realize that every time your heart broke, it broke open. Every time you were brought to your knees, something sacred was planted. And now you water those seeds with your tears, and something beautiful begins to grow. You recognize that your softness is not a liability. It's your power. You stop hardening to protect yourself. You stop building walls that keep love out. You begin to trust your boundaries to keep you safe, so you don't need to close your heart. You learn how to be open without being unguarded, how to be kind without being exploited, how to care deeply without drowning in someone else's waters. Your softness doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise. Because to remain tender in a world that tries to turn you cold is the bravest thing you can do. And in the quiet moments when no one is watching, you begin to feel proud, not of what you've achieved, but of who you've become, of the way you keep choosing truth, choosing peace, choosing yourself. Even when it's hard, even when it's lonely, even when it doesn't make sense, you realize that you are no longer waiting for someone else to name your value. You are no longer chasing a version of you that only exists in the minds of others. You are here, as you are, and that is enough. You begin to notice how peace feels in your body, not just as a concept, but as a physical presence. It's not just quiet in the room or silence in your phone. It's the absence of tightness in your chest, the loosening of your jaw, the space between thoughts. It's when your breath no longer catches in your throat at the sound of your name, when your heartbeat doesn't accelerate at every message, when you're no longer waiting for something to go wrong. Peace feels like being present in your own skin without needing to escape. It feels like walking into your home and not having to brace for anything. It feels like being able to exist without explanation, apology, or performance. You begin to realize that you didn't even know how loud the world had been until you finally heard the sound of your own serenity. You stop participating in conversations that ask you to shrink. You no longer feel obligated to explain the wholeness of your soul in places where your depth is met with discomfort. You don't adjust your tone just to soften your truth. You don't water yourself down for the sake of keeping things light. You speak honestly even when your voice trembles. And you notice who leans in and who pulls away. And that tells you everything. You don't need to be everything for everyone. You just need to be yourself in full. And you trust now that the people who are meant for you will find you there. In your honesty, in your clarity, in your unapologetic light. You start to understand that love isn't supposed to feel like confusion. It's not supposed to feel like waiting by your phone, rereading messages, wondering what you did wrong. Love doesn't hide behind mixed signals and uncertainty. Love shows up. It's not perfect. It's not always easy, but it's clear. And you stop settling for almost love, for maybe love, for sometimes love. You stop trying to decode what someone else won't say outright. You don't chase anymore. You don't plead. You don't beg to be chosen. You choose yourself, and you trust that what is meant for you will choose you too. Loudly, fully, without hesitation. You begin to see how much energy you've spent avoiding the truth. Not because you're a liar, but because the truth was too heavy to carry alone. You kept certain stories hidden, even from yourself, because to face them felt like opening a door with no floor behind it. But eventually the weight of hiding becomes greater than the fear of what's behind that door. So you open it, slowly, gently, and what you find isn't destruction, it's depth, it's memory, it's the root of your pain asking to be acknowledged. And you do. You don't run from it. You don't try to fix it immediately, you sit with it. And you begin to understand that the truth, even when it hurts, is what sets you free. You stop defining your healing by how well you can pretend everything's fine. You don't wear masks anymore. You don't force a smile when you need to cry. You stop pretending to be okay just to make others comfortable. You let yourself be real, raw, in process. You begin to understand that healing isn't about being happy all the time. It's about being honest. It's about allowing the full spectrum of your emotions without attaching shame to any of them. You say, today I'm hurting, and that doesn't make me broken. And that permission to feel, to not be okay, to exist in complexity, is what begins to mend you from the inside out. You begin to see solitude as sacred, not as something to be endured. You stop filling every space with people who don't understand you, just to avoid being alone. You stop giving your time to anyone who only shows up when it's convenient. You choose your own company with intention. You go on walks without needing to share every step. You sit in silence and notice how much peace lives there now. You write without sharing. You cry without explaining. You exist without being observed. And that solitude, it strengthens you. It clarifies you. It returns you to yourself. You learn how to witness without absorbing. You no longer take on the emotions of everyone around you. You no longer feel guilty for not fixing what isn't yours to heal. You understand now that empathy doesn't mean abandoning your own peace. You can care deeply and still keep your center. You stop losing yourself in the chaos of others. You learn how to listen without dissolving, how to hold space without disappearing. And in doing so, you finally learn the art of being present for others and for yourself. You begin to understand that rest is not laziness, that rest is not a reward for burnout. It's a right, it's a rhythm, it's a return to balance. You stop glorifying exhaustion, you stop measuring your worth by how productive you can be. You let your body rest when it's tired. You let your spirit pause when it's overwhelmed. You nap in the middle of the day without shame. You take breaks from what drains you. You leave messages unanswered without guilt. You give yourself the grace to do nothing. Because sometimes doing nothing is the most radical form of self-care. Sometimes stillness is the medicine. You start to feel more alive in your body. You notice the breeze on your skin, the way your lungs expand when you're laughing, the softness of a warm drink in your hands. You stop rushing through your days just to get to the end. You begin to notice the journey, not just the destinations. You taste your food more. You stretch more. You look at the sky and feel awe again. You see your body not as something to critique, but as a vessel for experience, a home for your soul. And that gratitude, that awakening to the miracle of existing, becomes a prayer you carry in every breath. You stop seeing your past as something to overcome and start seeing it as something to understand. You don't erase what happened. You don't rewrite the chapters, but you do reclaim your narrative. You say, this hurt me and I survived. You say, this shaped me, but it doesn't define me. You say, this is where I fell and this is how I rose. You stop being ashamed of where you've been. You stop hiding your scars. You start seeing them as symbols of strength, of endurance, of transformation. And that shift from shame to story is where you find your power. You begin to stop living for the future. You stop saying, I'll be happy when, and start saying, I am here now. You stop chasing a version of life that always exists one step ahead. You stop postponing peace. You begin to find joy in the moments between moments, in the way your favorite shirt fits just right, in the silence between songs, in the random kindness of a stranger. You realize that happiness isn't a place, it's a practice. It's in how you meet your life as it is, not as you wish it to be. And when you live like that, when you let joy meet you where you are, you begin to understand that you've been home all along. There comes a moment in your journey where you no longer feel the need to search for yourself in the reflections of others. You don't scroll endlessly for someone who says exactly what you feel. You don't seek a voice to articulate your worth, and you don't keep reaching for validation from those who can't see beyond their own filters. Instead, you begin turning inward, not as a desperate act, but as a natural return. You start hearing your own voice above the noise. You remember how it sounds, honest, soft, strong. You stop outsourcing your truth. You begin writing it with your own hands, and slowly it becomes the most trusted thing you know. You start noticing how sacred the ordinary truly is. You look at the steam rising from your coffee, and it feels like a ritual. You light a candle not to impress anyone, but to hold space for your presence. You fold your laundry with care. You breathe deeper during your walks. You make a playlist just to feel the pulse of old memories. You find yourself whispering thank you, often and without reason, not because everything is perfect, but because you're finally present enough to notice what is. The ordinary becomes extraordinary when you meet it with reverence.